Right, so I've just got a page here. This is sort of based on the template that you've got. I know you've already done quite a lot of work on this, but I'm just going to I've just done an example with a lot of lorem ipsum text here, and just to say that what I've got here is here's my body. There's the body, but inside the body, I've got first of all the heading, the H1, which is my name, of course, and then I've got 3 boxes or divs. If I just actually shrink these down, not 3, sorry, I've actually got 4, haven't I? So I've just got these 4 boxes, a div, in other words, but I've given them all exactly the same class name of info. And then inside each one of those, I've got a heading, and then I've got a paragraph of text. I mean, my intention will also be to put an image in there as well, but essentially that's the structure of my page. And you can see at the moment, I've got it over here on the right hand side. What have I done here? Hardly anything I've done to the CSS. I'll just show you what I've got at the moment. I've simply put in a background color, pale blue background color. I've changed the font generically overall so that it's a sans serif font. And I've also put the heading at the top in the center. So those are the only few things that I've done. But what I want to do is I want to think about how I can actually take control over the width of this content and how it's displayed. Because as you can see, if I actually pick up this browser, if I can only pick it up, there we are, and drag it out, you can see that on a large monitor, that's no good at all, because on a large monitor, we're actually extending the text to be far too wide. And the rule is that text should not really be delivered any more than about 65 to 70 characters on each line. Otherwise, it becomes impossible for people to read. So we need to make sure that we reduce that down. Now we could actually go for each of these info boxes and actually put some width restriction on that. But actually what I would rather do is think about the overall structure and try to think about wrapping those 4 elements into another element, into another HTML element. Now, block level elements, that is things like headings, divs and so on, there can be a whole number of things that are available to us. We can actually use sections and articles and all things like that, but there's one in particular that will actually serve us quite well in this particular purpose here, and that's called main. So I'm going to put in here a main box, and I'm going to actually wrap everything apart from my name into that box. So I'm going right the way down to the bottom after the last div, and I'm putting the closing div in there. So in other words, I've got a box called main, and then inside that I've got 4 boxes called info. That's obviously not going to make any difference to the appearance right now, but by having that in there, it means that when I go to my styles, I can do things like the following. And just to be clear, this is not a class name, so it's a top level element, like div, like article, like section. So I do need to, I'm going to put something in here to actually restrict the width of it. So I'm going to say that I want this to be, say, 75% width. Right, so now that's actually put a restriction on the width. But one of the other things I'm going to do is to just, again, this is not necessarily because I want this to be visually like this, but I'm going to put a border around this just to help you see where these things actually are. So I'm going to put a border of 2 pixels thickness. So I should have actually said solid. And then 2 pixels, and I'm going to just make it red. Simple as that. Okay, so there's my box. And now what I'm going to do is for the info boxes which sit inside there. Now this is a class name. It's a div, but it needs a class name. So I'm going to put .info, and this one I'm going to have a border around here as well, so that again it's obvious where they actually are. I'm hopeless at typing in the live presentation. It's hopeless, isn't it? Okay, there we go. So that's now got a border, although you can't really see it. Now you can't really see it because partly because everything is squished up together. And that's one of the other things that we want to resolve. And the way that we can resolve that, and again, some of this might be just giving you a bit of a heads up reminder about these things. When we have a box, a div, a main, whatever it might be, there are two controls over the space that's going on here. Around that box, we have something called a margin. So if I put a margin of, say, I don't know, 5 pixels, you'll see that that's now separated those boxes by 5 pixels. So let's be a bit more dramatic so that it makes it obvious. So you can see now that we've actually got I'm just going to let Sophia in. Okay, so Sophia's joining us. So you can see now that what that actually means. So the margin is that unit or that control on the outside of that box, whereas inside the box we might want to put some padding. And what we mean by padding is inside the box, and the reason that we might want to do this is because, as you can see, the text is actually crashing up against the edge, so we might want to reduce that or bring it in somewhat. So I'm going to give this 5 pixels on the just simply on the left and the right. So I'm going for 0 and 5 pixels. That means that 0 on the top and the bottom, 5 pixels left and right. So that you can see now it's shifted in. Okay, now the other thing that we can do with margin, which is quite useful for us, is we can actually make sure that this whole thing sits in the middle. And we can do that by using margin. And now again, I'm going to control the margin at the top and the left and the right. Top, bottom, left, right. So I'm just going to say I want margin at the top to be 0 and at the bottom to be 0, but I want to have an automatic margin left and right. So in other words, auto means give me whatever you've got left, basically. I've got a width of 75%. What's left? Well, of course, it's going to be half of 25%, 12.5%, but we don't need to put that figure in because it will actually work it out for us. So now you can see we've stuck it in the center. So those are sort of some very straightforward, basic things to do. But also I should just point out that, and maybe you've already realized this, HTML, when you deliver HTML to a web browser, there are already quite a lot of settings that are there, particularly when it comes to margins, and padding actually. So for example, you can see that there is a space between my top level heading, my H2, there's a space between that and the paragraph, and that's because there is already a margin there. So if I want to reduce that, for example, so let's say we go for H2, if I say margin 0, you'll see how it actually reduces that down, not by too much. But that's because we've actually got a margin for the paragraphs as well. So again, I'm not going to do this permanently, but just to demonstrate what I mean, if I say for paragraphs, if I say margin 0, that's actually going to have quite a dramatic effect. So as you can see, it crashes everything together. Now at the moment, we've only got one paragraph in each of these blocks, but it's just important for you to know that in web design, web development, quite a lot of web developers actually reset everything to 0, reset all of the margins to 0. And one of the things that we might want to do is to even reset the margin in the body so that there's no margin on the body. We sometimes do that. We sometimes say margin 0 on the body. Now that's not going to make a particular dramatic effect here, apart from the fact that it's giving it a little bit of extra space. But because we've got this heading at the top, if we now with our H1 we say margin 0, we actually will then have that going right up to the very top. like so. So you've got control over, you know, the margins on everything, and it's just worth bearing that in mind. I'm going to actually just take that off now because it's not particularly important, and I'll probably take that one off as well because I don't want my paragraphs to be so close together. Okay, so now that we've got this structure, and again, it depends on how far you've got with your work as to whether you want to look at the structure in your HTML. But you know, if you want to do something that I'm just going to demonstrate to you, then you will need to consider how you structure it. So there's sort of two stages to this. One is how can you structure your HTML to give you these elements, so one bunch of elements inside another, and then how can you then deliver that in different ways? Well, the answer to this is something called Flex. We have the ability to make a container flexible, and that's what I'm going to use here. So what we do is we write display flex. And as soon as we do that, it automatically puts these elements into a row, because by default that is the direction of these elements. Although they are one on top of the other in the order in the HTML, they are actually then delivered in this way. So you can actually see, if I just drag this out, they just simply fit in here, and the size of them is just simply dependent on the amount of content that's in there. So obviously the one that has little content is actually not taking up much space, whereas the one that has a lot takes up a lot more space. So so that's you know, the minimum that we can do with Flex. We obviously do need to do a lot more than that. So I'm just going to go into my main box here, and I'm going to put something else in here. So I'm going to put in Flex wrap. I'm going to tell it how I want it to wrap if it runs out of space. So when we run out of space, I want to make sure that it actually goes one below the other. That's the first thing. So you can see now that it actually changes it now to go back almost. It seems like it's gone back to how it was before, but it's not quite the same. Because now what I want to do for that info box, I want to tell it what I would prefer the size to be. So I'm not really changing the width as such, I'm actually changing the preferred width. So this is what we have to do. We have to say the flex basis, the basis of the width of this, we want to, I'm just guessing at the moment, but I'm going to go for 300 pixels. So this is, if you like, we're saying we want you to be 300 pixels. See what you can, if you can fit into that space, then please do so. And so what it does is, as you can see, it actually does fit, depending on how big we make this, then it actually does fit like that. Now obviously we've still got it not quite right, because by default the way that it's justified is justified to the left, or it's left aligned. So that's just one other thing that we need to do here, is we actually need to say how we want to justify the content, and we're going to make it, I'm going to actually say space between. So therefore if we do that, it will give us extra space between the elements, and everything will space out accordingly. There are quite a few other different options which I shall just explore with you. We can actually say space evenly, like this. So that now gives us space between and also on the outside of the box itself. So that using Flex is a good way to, as you can see, present the content in these two different ways, whether it be something that is on a larger monitor like this. I mean, obviously this is a very simple example, but if you look at, when you look at your own website that you've created, you know, for this assignment, you need to, once you've done this work, in a way, it would be a good idea, once you've actually gone through the next step, which we're going to cover a bit later on this afternoon, where you actually upload it to your site, you will want to look at it on a mobile phone and just see that you've managed to resolve that problem. Now, this is just one way that people tend to, one thing that people tend to do in order to try to get things to work in a responsive way. And in a way, this is kind of quite dramatic because it structurally changes the way the site appears. So obviously, you know, what we're doing here is we're saying we've got this content. When we are looking at it on a big screen, then we can actually separate these things out into these separate units. When we go down to smaller sizes, then you know, work that out for us, please, and then eventually we get down to these smaller sizes. However, when we get down to the real small sizes, we might actually prefer to use in something like Safari. So if you're using Safari, you should try to make sure that you've got this develop menu on. And you find that by going to Safari Preferences, and then in the Advanced section, check on Show Develop Menu in Menu Bar. And that will then put this up here. Now, once you've got that, what you can do is to enter responsive design mode. If you do that, then you actually, as you can see, you can then choose, you know, your favorite phone, or you can even go for an iPad. But obviously, the smallest one is the iPhone SE that's provided. I think if you use Google Chrome, you might get some other ones as well, but I'm not 100% sure about that. But one of the things that we want to do here, we look at this, and again, I'm hoping that you will understand me where I'm coming from here. Once we get something on a small device, we really want to make use of the majority of the screen estate that we've got. We don't want to have large amounts of margins around things. So we need to be able to find another way to change the CSS dependent upon the actual size of the device that we're looking at it on. And a common way to do this is to use something called a media query. And I'm into my CSS again now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a media query to say when the device that we're looking at this on is, let's say, a width of less than 500 pixels, then we need to do some other things to adjust it. So this is the way it works. This is the way a media query works. So we first of all type in media, not Madia, media. Okay, and then we're saying screen. So we're actually referring to the screen size. And then we say in brackets, we say, no we don't, sorry, we say media and, screen and, sorry, I forgot the and. And then in here we put in a width, a max width. So we're looking for a max width, and again, this number, because of course, well, again, I'm not going to go into this in much detail, but it is possible to have a number of different breakpoints. So you could have something different when it gets to you know, a width of say 900 pixels, and then another difference when you get down to a very small one, which is what I'm going to do here. So I'm saying with 500 pixels, when it gets to 500 pixels, then let's see what we want to change. So now we use the curly brackets. So this now inside here, we need to sort of put another set of controls which override the previous ones. So for example, as you can see, we've got in our main box, the box that's called main, actually has a width of 75%. So what we can do is we can say, well, main, now, when we get down to that size, I want the width of that to be 100%. So in other words, we're going to get, you know, reduce our margin down. So here we are. We've now, when we get down to that size, we've now made it take up a lot more. The content takes up a lot more space. If I actually drag this out, you'll see when I get up, we've got that margin, and then when I go down, then the margin is reduced. As long as I'm below 500 pixels wide, then we lose the margin and things come up close together. So do you see how, I mean, what we're referring to here is the red box. As we get smaller, as we get down to there, just about there, then we actually lose the margin. Or at least it's 100% width rather than a 75% width. We can do other things as well, but I just hope that you understand the actual structure of this. It's like you're nesting controls within this block. So this block here, curly bracket at the end, inside there are nested the other controls. So for example, what I might want to do is go with my info box. I want to make the flex basis, that is to say at the moment it's 300 pixels. I might want to make that 100%. So now we've got that width, but then when we go down to this size, we take up much more of the actual width of the telephone or whatever it is when we get down to that size. So anything that you want to override in here, then you put that into this part here. So I mean, again, I'm not necessarily saying that we would want to do this, but let's say, for example, you might want to actually change the font size, and so if you in the body you say font size, and you go for something like making it slightly smaller. Maybe you want to go to a well, I'll do it dramatically so that it's obvious. If I go for 75% in the body, then it means that everything will be changed. So as you can see, when we get to that point, all of the text changes to 75% of what it normally is. So that's the way the media queries work. Although, as I say, at the moment, the simple one that I've done here is just for 500 pixels. It is possible, of course, to have a number of different breakpoints. If you want to look at this on a really tiny phone like an iPhone, maybe you want to see what does it look like on an iPad mini, and you see here you've actually got the numbers at the top, what the actual width would be. So you can make a different one of these blocks here with a different number in, with a different max width, and then you can adjust it in that way. So unless I've actually missed anything out, I don't know if there's anything else. Oh yes, just one other thing. If you want to, I mean, in this particular scenario, if we want to put images in here, and of course, again, this is a bit of a reminder, this is what the image tag looks like. Image source alt tag, and I've got some images in here, so I'm going to go from I don't know, can't remember which ones are which now. Okay, that'll do. So I'm actually going to take that image there, copy that relative path, and I'm going to put that into here, but I only need that bit there. Now, of course, if I put that in there, now it's going to be full width, because basically it tries to find enough space to put the whole thing in. So essentially, you know, it's filling up and going way out beyond the bounds of the window. So what we actually need to do, of course, is we need to use our CSS to control the image itself. So what I'm going to do here is to say width 100%, because it's inside a box. Therefore, inside that box, it's constrained to only be 100% of that box. So again, I don't know whether I mentioned this earlier. I think I mentioned it in the morning session, but just so that you understand the percentage, when you're using percentage anywhere, you're actually then talking about a percentage of the parent box. So in this case, it's 100% of what we have. So the info box is what's contained in there. Although, as you can see, there is a slight margin around it, and that's because we have got inside that box, we've got some slight padding left and right. So that's why we've got that little space around it. So that basically is kind of, I think, enough for the moment, just to get you going with your work. And hopefully, if you got any questions for me or Adam, then please reach out. As I say, we need to, don't look at the clock in that room, by the way, because that clock is actually wrong, isn't it? It needs to go back an hour. So maybe you need to. Maybe Adam needs to get it off the wall and change the clock. So basically, I think unless there's any further questions, or any questions at all, I'm happy to answer questions, of course.